On behalf of our president, Mr. Rao Cunningham, and the members of the NAACP, we welcome you to our third education forum in collaboration with Jefferson County Public Schools. This evening, I will act as your moderator. During the presentation, we ask that you keep your microphones muted. This action will eliminate any noise that may disturb our presenters. We will have a question and answer period at the end of the presentation. At this time, I will turn the forum over to Dr. John Marshall, the Chief Equity Officer of Diversity, Equity, and Poverty Programs, who will give the purpose of tonight's program and recognize any special guests who are in attendance.
Okay, good afternoon. Again, my name is John Marshall. I'm the Chief Equity Officer for Jefferson County Public Schools. And Jefferson County Public Schools, Diversity, Equity, and Poverty, and the NAACP have been doing this community forum for about 3 to 4 years now. We understand that it's very important to stay engaged with our community and to work with our grassroots communities and leaders that are seriously, constantly out in the community trying to uplift and improve outcomes for our students, particularly Black and Brown students. The partnership that we have with the NAACP is one that we treasure and is one that we will keep going, that we will continue to build on. I believe Ms. Diane Porter's on here and is going to bring greetings in a little while, but on behalf of Dr. Marty Polio and the cabinet of Jefferson County Public Schools, I am pleased to be here. I am excited for this work, and we unapologetically have things that we must do. And super thank you to Mr. Rao Cunningham for always extending an olive branch and a hand to support, but be critical of the work that we are doing. So thank you all. And if there are any special guests, I will circle back around and address you all later. And thank you. And I will hand it over to Mr. William Bunton.
All right, thank you, Dr. Marshall. Good evening, everyone. As Dr. Marshall stated, I am William Bunton. I go by BJ. I am Executive Administrator for Diversity, Equity, and Poverty. And so I'm just going to talk briefly about my role in DEP, and then I'll turn it back over to Ms. Michelle Patrick. So my responsibilities are really twofold. One, to support Dr. Marshall where needed, whether that be within our department directly, interdepartmental initiatives, or in the community. So really, he likes to call me the Swiss Army knife in our department. So just, utility wise, being able to work where needed. And secondly, part of my responsibility is to raise accountability in terms of the work around racial equity. And so that is twofold there as well. So within our central office departments, and then also within our schools. And so a part of my responsibility will be to monitor and support the work centered on racial equity within our schools through the monitoring and support as they develop and carry out their racial equity plans. And then in terms of central office, it's also to monitor and support the work of our central office departments and help them develop goals, set benchmarks for their identified areas of focus within their racial equity plans as well. And so a part of that monitoring will be having regular meetings, and I've created a monitoring structure where I will meet with our central office folks and also our executive administrators that represent our schools bi-monthly, and to go over their plans and to help them create next steps in terms of progress towards their goals and their racial equity plans. And so we always like to say what gets monitored gets done. And so this is a part of that accountability that we are putting in place in diversity, equity, and poverty for central office and also our schools. And so again, thank you for having me, and just happy to be here and happy to be a part of diversity, equity, and poverty. And I'll turn it back over to Ms. Michelle Patrick.
Now we will have words from the chairperson of the Jefferson County Public School Board, Ms. Diane Porter.
Following directions, I was muted. I'm sorry. Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here this evening and to hear the presentation for tonight. I am Diane Porter. I am the District 1 School Board representative, so I feel very close to the conversations all the time. And it's an honor to be working with Diversity, Equity, and Poverty and the NAACP. And I think tonight we will get a very effective presentation. I'm looking forward to it. And my quick comments about racial equity is we wouldn't have it if we didn't call it out and if we didn't work on it. So I'm proud of the work that we've done. I will honestly say we're not nearly finished, but because of Dr. John Marshall and those before him, we have moved a mighty long way. And I am proud to have worked during this time with them. And Mr. Button, also known as BJ, is still mine. He's leaving my school, but he still belongs to me. I don't care where he goes, and we've already had that conversation. So what I would like to say is that we have come a way. We have done many things that other districts have not done, primarily starting with the racial equity plan. But before that, we started with the resolution for males of color. And because of that resolution for the males of color, which I'm extremely proud of, we got that idea from the Council of Great City Schools, and from that we grew into the Du Bois Academy. So what I don't think people understand is you start small and you get larger and larger, and you have policies to put things in place. So you didn't come to hear me. I just want to say thank you for being here. It's my honor to be here, and thank you very much. And Ms. Patrick, I will give it back to you.
Thank you. Tonight, I have the pleasure to introduce Mr. Robert Moore and Mr. DeJuan Williams. Mr. Robert Moore received his superintendent certification from the University of Kentucky. In January of 2021, Mr. Robert Moore was named Chief of Schools for the Jefferson County Public Schools. Before Mr. Moore's appointment, he served as the Supervisor of Leadership and Development for Jcps. While serving in this role, Mr. Moore worked to create a pipeline of principals as strong instructional leaders. Mr. Moore also led the program Emerging Leaders, which is based on a nationally renowned approach in leadership development. Prior to joining JCPS, Mr. Moore and his leadership helped to improve achievement in state accountability in Mason County schools. Mr. DeJuan Williams earned his business degree from the University of Louisville, an MBA from Indiana Wesleyan, and a principal certification from Western Kentucky University. Mr. Williams served as an assistant principal at Cane Run Elementary School. Since joining the Department of Diversity, Equity, and Poverty programs, Mr. Williams has focused on improving the racial equity capacity of school leaders, principals, assistant principals, and counselors. With intentional professional development, improved programs, systems, and continuous support to schools. In addition, Mr. Williams was responsible for the implementation of a district-wide implicit bias training for all certified and classroom-based classified employees, which helped to promote courageous conversation and changes related to race, implicit bias, and microaggression. Without further talking about these wonderful gentlemen, I turn it over to them.
Thank you, Miss Patrick, or I guess I can say after 30 minutes ago, cousin Michelle Patrick found out that we are related. So thank you, cousin Michelle Patrick, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you for having me, NAACP Jefferson County branch, or Louisville branch, I should say, in our presentation with Mr. Williams on screening for equity. So happy to be with you here tonight. So happy to be with Dr. Marshall and Miss Porter for another late night. We may have to, one of us is going to start bringing some snacks or some food or something on these late nights. So if we're going to be together on these late nights. So, but I'm just happy to present this information and so proud of the work and the partnership with Mr. Williams and Dr. Marshall, and proud to be able to share this work where we are so far, where we've come so far, and give you a little preview of where we're going with this work.
And hello, everyone. My name is Dewan Williams, and I am also glad to be with you this evening. Some of you may know my face from being at NAACP meetings in the past. Even most recently, my family, mostly my boys. I got twin boys that are 15. Participated in the Stand Up, Speak Out campaign, door-to-door GOTV campaign that was really effective. So the work of racial equity, the work of activism is definitely in my blood, and I appreciate the work that NAACP does as well. Thank you.
And just to kind of set the context of why we are here presenting this work. When I first arrived, one of the things that Dr. Marshall came to me, and when Dewan assumed his position with, is some work based around three questions. One, what are we doing in our current power of influence to close the racial equity gap? Two, how will we know that it is sufficient? And using that information, what role does that information play into administrative advancement? So what are we doing? How do we know it's sufficient? And thirdly, how does that play into going that next level, whether it's going from AIC to AP to principal to central office? How do we know that we are closing that racial equity gap in our work, in our power of influence?
So from there, Dr. Marshall, Dr. John Marshall, he had this idea, was thinking through what makes an equitable leader. And we had conversations around what should our leaders look like in our district, in JCPS? Not look like visually, but what should they be demonstrating in the schools? And that then led into some discussion around this work, around creating a racial equity screener to help make sure that we know that our leaders are prepared and have demonstrated the competencies and leadership qualities and they're about the work of racial equity. So there is nothing minor about us or this work. As we've demonstrated, we are definitely about the work of racial equity and about our Black and brown kids. But equally, it's important that we build the capacity of others, because we know not everyone's on the same page with us. So it's important that we make sure we provide opportunities for that development, for that capacity building, for that leadership, so that way that when those other folks are leading, that they are able to lead through a similar equity lens that we lead through.
And just to provide you with a little context of the current leadership hiring process, currently what we have in place and what we're going to build on right now, if you want to become a leader in Jefferson County, of course, you have to go through the application process and upload some documents. What's new is that now you have to have artifacts for each pillar. So candidates have to upload artifacts around racial equity, one of our pillars. So that's something that was newly cemented this year when candidates had to upload that artifacts, and that's one of the things we look at during the slating process, which you'll see at the bottom there. There's also a predictive index assessment. Predictive index assessment looks at, there's a behavior index, and then there's a cognitive assessment that candidates go through during the application process. And then you go through what's the slating process. And it's a little bit out of order there. The slating process is blind selection. Now the names are redacted. So that's all you have is just the pertinent information, like the artifacts, the job experience, what roles they've had in administration. So it's the names aren't off of there, and any other identifying marks are not, or identifying qualities are not on there. Race, sex, none of that information is on there. You're purely looking at the the qualifications of the candidate. So we want to erase that that long tradition of it's who you are. And so that is taken out of the slating process. And then you go on to the interview committee before advancing to the sitting in front of a site-based council who makes the decision, which ultimately could be made by Dr. Polio in Jefferson County. But there hasn't been a case where he has went against a site-based council decision.
So it was vital that in our development and kind of thinking through this process or this plan here, that we make sure that our leaders are addressing racial equity. So in the current role, what has a candidate done in regards to racial equity? What trainings has a candidate attended with regard to cultural competence? And then what proven and positive impact has a candidate had on improving racial equity in their school or even in their department if they're not in the school directly? These were central questions that we kind of set as our base, a foundation for the work that we're about to present. Next one, please. Abdul, next one, please. Thank you. So in that we challenge, I mean, in our department, in diversity, equity, and poverty, there is no reason why, to be frank, there's no reason why that a leader or even an employee within JCPS should say that they don't know or don't have access to knowledge of racial equity. There's not any reason why. Our department offers over 300 hours of professional development yearly, and that number is growing. And so now it's about holding folks accountable to accessing that information, so that way they can't say they don't know. When they truly do know and get empowered by these wonderful trainings and developments that we offer, then they can grow as individuals and as leaders.
The racial equity, the racial pillar in policy calls for JCPS staff to address the historically marginalized and disproportionate outcomes of students of color. And you can see the bullets under there that we understand that effective teaching and leadership are paramount in addressing the aforementioned, and then staffing is absolutely paramount. And for the short time that we've had our pillar and policy in place, we have seen definitely some growth in our leadership. I mean, the fact that we now have 39% of principals are Black, not just people of color. We have 39% are Black. So that in itself has been tremendous progress over the past few years. It was not like that prior to Dr. Marshall introducing the racial equity pillar and policy into Jefferson County. So we have made some gains with teacher retention, but we still have a ways to go. Right now, we have, as far when you look at our staffing and our principals, we have very few. The Black principals that we have are dominated by strong Black women, and you can see the theme of this slide deck is it celebrates women's history as you look at some of the photos. So that is one thing that I tried to focus on during my previous position of breaking that stereotype that as Black men, we can't be instructional leaders. And so that's one of the things that we're working on. We need areas of growth. We have 0 Hispanic principals in our district, a district that is as diverse as Jefferson County, 0 Latinx. So we do have a ways to go when it comes to some of our some of our data, but you know, it's something that has been historic. I mean, I was at Jefferson County. I'm a product of Jefferson County schools. I did not have a Black teacher until the 8th grade. I mean, think about that. I grew up in West Louisville. I didn't have a Black teacher until Mr. Lattimore, his first year teaching. He's my 8th grade science teacher and basketball coach. That was my first Black teacher. Him and Mr. Johnson was my shop teacher at Western Middle School. Those are my first Black teachers that I had coming through Jefferson County Public Schools, and they were obviously they were critical to my development. So when it comes to the outcomes of students of color, I'm an example of that, being exposed to 2 strong black teachers. And I don't want to discredit the late Mr. Fenderson, who was my principal at Shawnee the first 2 years. And so, I mean, having those influences on me, and I mentioned last night or Tuesday night, my man, Mr. Newton, and his Edward Newton, my counselor, his relentlessness of making sure that I understood that I don't have to bounce a ball in order to get my college paid for, that I can use my brain. So we understand that staffing is paramount, and we've done a lot to close that gap, but we have a lot more to do. And hopefully some of the things we're going to share with you helps to close that gap some more. Next slide.
So we created a system that screens for equity to ensure that candidates applying for school leadership positions are not someone's favorite, but rather the most favorable and equitable for students, and more specifically, students of color. So it's important that the system that we create and that we've created here is a system that's fibrous and actually lasts throughout our Jcps system. That way that it actually allows for our students of color to be addressed in a more equitable way.
And right now, we and as we go through these dispositions and descriptors, keep in mind we actually have 3 piloting groups who are going through this process of screening. One is emerging leaders. Our emerging leaders are all JCPS staff members. All of them have already achieved their and have their administrative degree. Some of them are AICs, some of them are teacher leaders, some of them are APs who have but they're not yet principals yet. So this is the principal pipeline that's in place. It's led through a group called New Leaders, who is known for increasing the capacity of instructional leadership and is known to get results. And that's who leads those monthly sessions with emerging leaders. Dewan and I both have presented to emerging leaders and given out this screener that you're about to see a little later on. Then we have our aspiring leaders working in conjunction with Spalding University. Dr. Glenn Beatty, who runs the principal, the leadership development at Spalding University. We're partnering with him. They're taught. This is for candidates who are trying to get their administrative degree, initial administrative degree, taught by all JCPS staff member. Mr. Lattimore is one of the teachers that teaches some of the class, along with Mr. Beatty. And these are all JCPS, again, all JCPS staff members who do not have their administrative degrees yet. So many of them are classroom teachers who are getting some authentic JCPS experiences, going through the pillars, going through the 6 systems, and learning what it's like to be a principal in a large public school district. So they're getting an authentic, one of the most authentic experiences they can get. Normally in a normal year that we would have them out in some of our buildings getting some clinical hours. And I pushed on Glenn Beatty. I said, we're not going to have them just going to your so-called cushy schools in the district. I want to see them in some of our most diverse schools and getting a very diverse experience when it comes to their clinical hours. But we haven't had that opportunity yet, and hopefully we may be able to get some of them into our schools once we start. And then our Louisville teacher residency. These are they're not certified teachers yet. They do have their a bachelor's, but they're working on their master's in teaching and working in some of our more challenging schools, getting a rich, authentic, multicultural experience. And I'm so excited to start in person back so they can get into some schools and get that feel of what it's like. And the great thing that they're going to get is and for a while it's hard when you do your student teaching in the fall, or I should say in the spring. But the great thing they're going to see what it's like for a first day of school, which is so critical in the first 2 weeks of getting that experience. So I'm excited about the Louisville teacher residency group.
So during that discussion or exploration that Robert and I was having around what makes an equitable leader, we started listing a bunch of dispositions of what a leader looks like and what kind of demonstrations we would like to see. And we narrowed it down to 4 dispositions. Of course, we could have had a couple pages easily, but we narrowed it down to 4 dispositions that we feel like embodies the most equitable leader that we could possibly have here in JCPS. And the first disposition is centered around that identifies and addresses actions that use school data to confront and improve outcomes for students of color. So we know that we're a data-driven society and a data-driven in education. But at the same time, we have to make sure that we're addressing exactly the needs of our students of color through that data, and then with actual steps. What exactly are you doing about it? It's one thing, and we say all the time, it's one thing that show me data, but what are you doing with it? What are you doing to truly make an impact on behalf of those that you're identifying? So if it's African American females, we see through the comprehensive school survey, which is a survey that's given out to students, and it showed that the sense of belonging is low for some reason for 8th grade girls, for instance. Well, then once you've identified that through a committee, through a team, through a leadership team, what exactly now are you doing about it as a leader in your role, even as a teacher? What are you doing about it? And then being able to demonstrate in those actionable steps that activism that's really important to disrupt a lot of the systems that disenfranchise and I honestly marginalize our students of color. The second disposition we looked at was practices, decision-making, and responsiveness to cultural competence. Again, with all the plethora of professional development that we offer here in JCPS and within our DEP, there's a lot of opportunity to then tap in to what are you doing with cultural competence or culture relevant material? What are you doing to make sure that things are relatable to our students of color? So when they walk in the schoolhouse, they are seeing and hearing representations of their own culture, their own community, their own interest. If they're not, then that's not an environment that's productive and is inclusive for them, and the outcomes are definitely challenging for our students in those situations. And then thirdly, demonstrates leadership that disrupts inequities in our schools. If you see it and don't act on it, then why aren't you? And the main thing in these dispositions is that we're looking at, a lot of times in the past, there's been times where I've been in an interview, for instance, a principal interview, and the candidate sat at the table and said, this is what I would do if I got the position. If I got at that school, at Robert Moore Academy, this is what I would do. But instead, they weren't able to speak to what they have been doing in their current role. And that's so important because we know that oftentimes when folks get the position, they forget about what they said and they're not doing what they said they're going to do. So we want to make sure at least they're demonstrating these disruptive inequities or disruptive leadership in their current role. And fourth disposition is around reflects on personal growth and equitable educator. Reflection is so key. We know that from Dr. Martin Luther King and a lot of our civil rights leaders that reflecting on our own personal growth, our own biases, our own shortcomings is so important to make sure we've closed the gaps so that way that it doesn't then transcend or then affect the people that we're leading or the students that we're around. And so reflection is so key, and we'll go into some of what that looks like in a moment. You're on mute, Robert.
Sorry, I think you have these first two descriptors, Duane.
Yes, sir. So the first descriptor here is, we call them equitable descriptors. And the first one is around confronting behavior that openly and covertly promotes inequities, colorblindness, and deficit thinking. You know, the deficit thinking is very, very key, because oftentimes if a leader or a person of influence is dealing with students of color and they're automatically thinking that they can't do because of where they come from or the trauma that that they've experienced, then already that student is fighting an uphill battle because they don't have the advocate in their corner. And so that's the first thing. Second thing is, are they regularly examining district data for signs of inequity within the district leadership team? Are they utilizing the racial equity scorecard? It's a scorecard that DEP, the Diversity, Equity, and Poverty, has that outlines behavior, but not just to focus on behavior. We need to focus on academics. Where our gaps are at, and if we identify gaps, then what are we doing with it? And then lastly, like I stated earlier, the comprehensive school survey. Those are areas in which that we can look at some equitable descriptors around the disposition one, which is again around data. Now the disposition two is around decision-making and responsiveness to culture competence. The descriptors that fit on that area is actively seeking and making use of diverse perspectives in decision-making. So if you're not a person of color, if you're a white person in leadership or in an influential role or a teacher, are you then bringing other folks to the table, persons of color to the table to help in decision-making process? If you're not being an equitable leader. Two, considering the intended and unintended consequences of decisions on all stakeholder groups. Now, our DEP department has created REAP, which is a racial equity analysis protocol, which helps to unpack unpack basically some inequities in processes and policies or in procedures that happen within the school. If you're not utilizing the REAP for the things that whether it's a dress code or whether it's a parent night, think through those things and utilize that so that way that you make sure we're not disenfranchising or marginalizing our students of color. Three, in group discussions, paying close attention to which voices aren't being heard, and basically making sure to express their perspectives. Sorry, my lights are flickering. I don't know if it's a storm coming or what here. So hopefully the lights don't go out. And then fourth, actively seeking to learn about the identities and communities of students of color in our schools. And fifth, when decisions are being made, pushing the decision maker to the question which groups are benefiting and which are being left out. I think about a time when I was as assistant principal, we had a long-standing policy that our parent nights started at 5 o'clock, but I'd already heard from some of the teachers that parents don't come. You know, and so I'm already thinking, so what's the issue here? So I had just started. We still had the parent night. We had it at 5 o'clock. And not very many parents came at 5. At 6 o'clock, they were running through the door trying to come in to see that, to advocate for their students, to be there for their kids. And so the discussion was, I said, we need to start it at 6 o'clock next time. Because that means that some teachers may need to go get a bite to eat after work, after class is over. But if we're then inviting more parents in, and we're not making it equitable, then we're engaging our parents, which then helps our students. So that's just one ways of leadership that we need, and we think that more of our leaders should do.
Thanks, DeJuan, for sharing that. And the descriptors under 3 all fall under the previous disposition of leadership that disrupts racial inequities. And all of these, they don't work independent of one another. They all work together. So, for example, we use suspension data pre-K through 3 to disrupt what we're doing to our kids. If you listen at the board meeting on Tuesday, of ours, we're no longer working to no longer suspend our pre-K through 3rd grade, especially with our reopening. I mean, it just makes no sense to suspend a pre-K through 3rd grade at this point. And our data showed that we were doing it too much. And if you think about the hybrid schedule that we're in, you suspend a kid on a Monday, they're not going to see their teacher until that next week. If you suspend them for a day or two. So that was just a disruptive racial inequity move that Dr. Marshall and the committee recognized. And then the last one, reflecting on your personal growth. What are you doing to become a more equitable leader? And look, and what more can you do? Look upon look at your data, look at yourself. Did you take the implicit bias? Are you going to work on those things that you learned from the implicit bias? And then every single administrator has to have a racial equity growth goal on their PGP. That's the professional growth plan. So you have to do that. I mean, there's that's what you're being evaluated on. And then speaking of evaluation, for the first time, you will be as a principal evaluated on racial equity. I mean, the standard 3 from the PEACE standards just adopted this year says equity and cultural responsiveness. Effective educational leaders strive for equity of educational opportunity and cultural responsive practices to promote each student's academic success and well-being. So principals are evaluated, and our principal supervisors are expected to evaluate principals on equity and cultural responsiveness. And then next steps, what are we going to do to get this and launch this equity screener to make sure that we're closing the equity gap? Because it's more than just getting more Black and brown principals as leader in the building, because we're going to have principals who are not Black and brown, but they need to have the same equitable lens and focus as our Black and brown principals, and our Black and brown principals need to have the focus and that equitable lens. So number 1, approve and implement rubric with human resources. Dr. Marshall and his team has took the dispositions and the descriptors that we laid out, and they have created a rubric to say, and DeJuan laughs, but I said, how are we gonna make sure that a candidate is green dotted? Like, boom, he's a go when it comes to, or she's a go when it comes to racial equity. How are we gonna make sure? How are we gonna measure that? What does that look like when you look at these descriptors? So we have a rubric a draft of a rubric that we're looking to get across to human resources. And then review and revise based on the piloted groups. I talked about those 3 groups that are currently going through this process. We want to make sure, using the information from those 3 groups, that this process works and that the format works, and that we're able to collect appropriate data and that we have the right dispositions. And then number 3, present to cabinet for some feedback. Those are all the chiefs and Dr. Polio getting their eyes on it and showing them the work from the pilot groups. And then we want to include it in our leadership tracking system. That's something I didn't mention at the beginning. When I first took this position, I started work through the what's called the Wallace Foundation. And one of the domains, it's a popular leadership pipeline group. And one of the domains that under the Wallace Foundation speaks on this leadership tracking system. It's very popular in I believe it's San Diego or San Francisco, sorry. And then there's one, there's in Gwinnett County Public Schools, there's a leadership tracking system that we try to model after. Basically, that's where all leaders in a district is housed, and it has all this data about the leader. And so what it's used for is for candidacy matching. You have this leader with all this data, and then you have this school with all this data. Is what leaders can you extract from this pool of candidates that match the needs of this school? So it's like candidacy matching. We don't need a leader that doesn't have an equitable lens leading our AIS schools. I'm just going to tell you that straight up. And so those are the kind of things that a leadership tracking system can do for you. Can filter out what is needed to match it and do some candidacy matching for the building.
August 1st. So it's in our department, in diversity, equity, and poverty, we laugh a little bit because Dr. Marshall has challenged every single person in our department about what he calls actually A Day, hashtag A Day. And that is that if any work that we're currently working on or will be working on, if it's not ready to go by August the 1st, we need to cease working on it. Postpone it, because it's so important that the work that we're pushing out, the things that we're working on currently, that we're able to have it in action for our students coming back, definitely back in the fall. And so that's what we're working for on August the 1st, that this will be a leadership tracking part of the leadership tracking system. The screener will be a vital piece of it, and that we're going to have this fibers throughout the district. I think we're ready for questions, Ms. Patrick.
Thank you. And before we begin our Q&A, Dr. Marshall would like to speak to us again. Dr. Marshall?
Sure. Again, thank you all for coming. The Cliff Notes version, the Johnism is, if we all sat and thought about our careers, we all sat and thought about the people we had to sit beside that had no business sitting beside us in a principal's room, in a teacher's room, in an AP office, and they still got there. We are now saying, if you go through this screener and you can't be about racial equity, you don't need to be in that principal's room. We all know people that got there because of their last name, because they're cute, because they ran a ball, because we were doing a favor. That has to stop. What JCPS is going towards is, if you weren't racially equitable as a teacher, why in the hell would we think you're going to be racially equitable as an AP? So you're going to have to prove that you are about racial equity in your current station before you move to another station to do more damage. So this screener actually says, black, white, green, or whatever, bring your cachet of work and let's do that. Because you can interview, you can feel good, you can have a last name of a superintendent, you can have the last name Marshall, son of Bonnie Marshall, but if you can't lay that cachet of work down, now I can, don't get it twisted, but if you can lay that body of work down and really show that you are about it, you shouldn't move forward anymore. So that's what this screener is about, and that's why we are trying to do this work. I would be remiss, there's a reason why DEP put a lot of females on here. Happy Women's History and Heritage Month. Also be remiss if we did not recognize, along with Ms. Porter, some soldiers in human resources and recruiting with Dr. Greer, Dr. Starks, and Dr. Bonnie Marshall, who are on here. But this is the next iteration of it. You ain't moving forward anymore if you can't prove that you are about racial equity at the beginning. So in a nutshell, that's what this work is. I'm very thankful for it. It has come with hate mail. It has come with resistance. It has come with cowards, and it has come with ambition. But we're going to keep doing the work, and we're going to keep pushing forward. So thank you. And again, I see my main man, Rao, on here. Rao, I always appreciate the venue and the opportunity to do this work. We will open this up for questions, and I believe we have about 15 minutes left. Thank you.
Thank you. We can start with some of the Q&As I have that went through the chat, and maybe you could answer these first. And then I would like to tell individuals, if you look down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a word that says reaction, and you can raise your hand. And there's a little slit down there where it says raise your hand, and you can raise your hand and we'll identify you so you could ask a question, or you can continue to put them in your chat. The first question that I got from the chat is, what is the percentage of minority students in JCPS, and what percentage is African American?
It's about 53% students of color, about 33, give or take on how they qualify, how we qualify ourselves, about 33% Black.
We have a total of a little over 96,000 students. 35,843 are considered African American, but we do have a considerable amount of students who are 2 or more races, so that can mean several things. I don't know how that factors into some of our ethnic data, but so yeah, right at about, and I think BJ put in there right at about 36%.
And Ms. Patrick, about, and I think that's Mr. Ivory asking the question. I'll get the exact number. About 84 to 88%, depending on how they qualify, is white female teachers.
Dr. A.O. Baker, she wanted to be, she wasn't aware that there was the Emerging Leaders Program, and she wants to know how she can find out more about it.
Yeah, she sent me she also sent me a direct message, okay. So she can get with me, and I will get her information on that. I sent her another question, so she's, yeah, she will be good to go.
Okay. Also, Mr. Ivory wanted to know how many Black male classroom teachers are there in JCPS? Did we address that?
1,313, correct, Don? Right around there?
I think that's just teachers, not
oh, that's just Black. Yeah, I can't remember. That's about how many Black teachers we have. I don't know by male. I would say this year, this is the biggest recruiting class of first-year Black male teachers since I've been up there in JCPS. So it's the biggest recruiting class, I will say. But I'll get that for you, Mr. Ivory.
Are there any other questions? I have one, if I may ask. I listened to all the things that you are doing right there in your hiring practices at central office, but does the local school with their site-based councils, have they been trained, or are they aware of what to look for when it comes to identify a principal for that building?
SBDMs have been trained. SBDMs also sit with me under the leadership of Dr. Stinton at the beginning of the summer. There was an SBDM training. However, it depends on the will of the SBDM and the willingness to want to diversify. So they understand what we're doing. Dr. Shauna Stinton has worked to make sure that SBDMs have the training, but at the end of the day, the way it is written, that they can still hire who they want.
If I am getting these, I think you call it evidence of addressing racial equity, if I am looking to be a principal, can I use those evidence, can I use those as artifacts to put in my portfolio to help me with getting hired?
Yes, and that was the purpose, and that was one of the purpose of the racial equity, or it could be one of the usage of the racial equity screener when the candidates in that pipeline are ready to fill out their application, they don't have to start digging and searching for artifacts for that application and to fulfill that pillar. It's right there, and as the supervisor of leadership of development, I felt it was my job to prepare them to be able to complete that task. And that's what I told them up front, that if they're not ready to do that work, then you are not going to be considered for a leader in Jefferson County.
Okay, I see a hand raised, Miss Judy Littman. Yes.
Thank you. Thanks for this program today. I'm wondering though, what is the relationship of what you told us today about the hiring practices and racial equity? What is the communication with our Jefferson County Board of Education, as well as with the State Board of Education? Is there interaction, response from, please explain that relationship. This is
Sure.
so powerful.
Sure. The State Board of Education, to a degree, is informed. DeJuan did not share, or Robert did not share that 6 universities in the state have asked them to come and actually help them figure out how to do this in their College of Ed programs and build this out, starting with EKU, K-State, leaning into U of L a little bit, but we have Dr. Stark on here, so we'll move that. Our Board of Education, our stalwart supporter, is always Ms. Diane Porter. But this is going to be a bigger presentation, Ms. Littman, excuse me, when we present to the board on the racial equity policy. So a bigger, more in-depth more in-depth presentation on all the stuff we're doing with racial equity will be fed into there, and they will be brought up to speed. The reason it is a pilot and the reason it hasn't become completely fibrous is because the board has not laid eyes on the entire racial equity update plans, including how we're going back to school, including the response to COVID. But I'll say this at all times, we are very supported by Ms. Porter and others on the board to make sure this happens.
Thank you.
Great question. Thank you.
Okay.
I think Dr. Greer has a question. She put it in the chat, but I'm sure she's on. Dr. Greer?
While we wait, Mr. Ivy, Dr. McPhail is on here. There is 212 Black male teachers during 2019-2020. There were 212 Black male teachers.
And I was going to update that we have we've gained 3. We have 215 from got that from out of 6,964 teachers. That's 3% of our 3% of our teachers are Black men. We have 155 AICs, which is academic instructional coaches, and this is what I was leaning on earlier about the view of Black men. We have 0 Black men who are academic instructional coaches. We have 293 assistant principals. 27 of them are Black men, 9.2%. And then principals, 143 principals, 17 are Black men. So that's 11.9, but right at 12%. So you can see most of our principals are Black females.
Okay. Dr. Greer, it says James P. Greer. I'm hoping that I'm speaking of the right Greer here. The question is, as you increase the number of leaders who have the talent, skills, and attitudes that support racial equity, what is your expectation for their impact on reducing the achievement gap? And what kind of timelines do you have in mind?
Can I go first, Dewan and Robert, then we'll jump in. I want to
Absolutely.
remind, and I'm glad Raul is on here, and we all agree with this, but I want to remind the NAACP as family. And we have to be very careful when we say we need minority teachers, we do. But if we never get another minority teacher in the classroom, we still need white teachers to do what they're supposed to do and be anti-racist. So we do not need to let white teachers off the hook and not be culturally competent and say, well, if we just got more Johns and Rails in the classroom, things would be better. You signed up, you are in front of a whole bunch of black babies, you still need to be anti-racist and do your job. So as we say we need minority teachers and we believe it, we also need white teachers because the numbers are clear. We're not going to get balance that out anytime in the next 3 or 4 years. We need white teachers to do what they signed up to do and become culturally responsive. The research is clear to the question. As we get more minority teachers, you heard Robert say it, you get more access to gifted and talented, the suspensions go down, engagement goes up, sense of belonging goes up, and parent trust in schools go up. Research proven. So we have to, it's kind of a twofer. On one side, we need white teachers to do what they're supposed to do and teach black kids. And on the other side, we need black teachers to come in and save, support, rescue, and lift up black students at the same time. The timeline in which we see this is, it's a long-term goal, but we have been working on this for a while. So in the next, we're talking about future state work, in the next 2 to 5 years, we should see an influx or an increase in all levels and all roles for educators, administrators of color. But at the same time, we should see an improvement in classrooms where there are white teachers as well. Because black people didn't create this problem. So we shouldn't be the only ones that have to fix it.
I noticed that we have a question from Miss Andriana Staten.
It's Adriana Stanton.
I'm sorry, Adriana, I'm sorry.
And I'm a student in Jcps. And I was wondering how you all are planning to incorporate student voice, because myself and my peers feel as if a lot of the inequality comes directly from where you live, because I live in the South End, and if I hadn't gone into like magnet schools, I wouldn't have half the opportunities that I have access to now. And I was wondering if you all were doing anything to really work on how students feel.
Great question. Is Mr. Van on here? Or is he not?
Not on here.
Okay. So a couple of things, and great question, and thank you for that question. And then, of course, Don or anyone else that wish to answer it. Student voice in this work for recruiting is something that is very important. You know, I don't know what school you are in, but the Black Student Unions is definitely the place where Dr. Polio and the board believe there could be voice as well. And there's also a student groups that Mr. Bunton will be working on, or student advocates, racial equity groups and committees in every school that Mr. Bunton will be working on when he becomes fully a part of our division, to make sure student voice is heard around what's going on inside of the schools, and make sure students are more informed of the racial equity policy and how to advocate for that work. So great question, much more to do. And the student voice part right now is coming through Black student unions and of course teacher advocates, but will also be in the racial equity committees. Mr. Bunton, do you want to talk to that a little bit?
Well, add to Justice Now too.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, Justice Now. And then John, also to add to that would be the use of the affirming racial equity tool. So with our PLs, with our professional learning communities, our teacher groups, and so them planning, utilizing that particular tool, within that tool has that component embedded in there, because you are thinking from a culturally responsive and a racially equitable lens, which helps embed voice into the teaching. And so that's where that's where the rubber meets the road. And so we always talk about things that we do reaching the desk of students. And so if our teachers are planning, utilizing that tool, and their collaborative teams are utilizing that tool during that planning, they're thinking from the equitable lens, and that should translate into the work that students have produced, that are produced by students, being authentic and being able to have some voice in what they do. And so that is another component. And then, like Dr. Marshall said, a part of my charge is to be over, not necessarily be over, but to help support racial equity committees within schools with their goals tied to the racial equity plan. And so that's a part of that monitoring piece that I talked about earlier. That would be a part of my responsibility. And so, and that is something that we can look at. And so, like DeJuan said earlier, if we're looking at our comprehensive school survey data, and we see that there is a lack of student voice or a lack of student belonging, and that's a goal that those racial equity committees could adhere to and be able to work on. And then, as a result, that's something that I would monitor, working with those other executive administrators within, that work with those particular schools.
We have time for one more question, and this came from Dr. Baker. Dr. Marshall, she wants to ask you, how is racial equity communicated in early childhood?
It starts with Dr. Carmen Coleman, who is over early childhood, and she is the one that's actually doing that kind of work with racial equity. She works through Dr. Alicia Averett, who is directly working with early childhood. And we have now decided, and we've actually realized that some of the things in early childhood that we need to address with racial equity need to kind of be ushered in more. One of our very tenacious colleagues, Lamanda Moore Rodriguez, was on here. If she is, I'll ask her to speak, but we're actually working with early childhood on the same anchor documents that we're working with other schools on, the REAP, the Affirming Racial Equity tool, Equity Monitoring Progress tool, and all those things to make sure that there is some culturally responsive and culturally responsible teachers and leaders in that building. If Ms. Moore Rodriguez is on here, do you wish to add anything to that, Lamanda? I don't know. I thought I saw her.
She was, which I think she's gone.
Okay.
But Dr. Marshall, I'll add just a little bit. I know that we have a task force as well, a racial equity task force that I sit on. And they've identified 3 areas within this equity task force. And one area is leadership, recruitment and retention, equity and leadership. The second is equity in kindergarten readiness. And the third is equity in culture and climate. Now, Lamanda Moore Rodriguez sits on the kindergarten readiness. So that's 3 areas that have been identified that we've been working through with internal and external participants to help make sure that the equity, and there's addressing different things of equity. For instance, with leadership, they're trying to figure out how to get more early childhood teachers of color, how to recruit more. And what we've noticed through the data is that they actually have a lot of teacher assistants that are of color. But what are we doing to help promote them, to help provide opportunities to get certification, or even provide some ways for them to empower within the classroom so they have a voice where they don't feel like they've been marginalized and they don't have the connection with the students. So those are just a few things that we've been working on in regards to early childhood.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This concludes our question and answer session. Now we will hear from Mr. Don Dillard, Satellite Officer Supervisor, who will give you information about the next NAACP and JCPS Community Forum.
Okay, we have two more community forums. The next one is going to be April the 8th in 2021. Dr. Vanessa McPhail is going to go over the racial equity analysis protocol. The REAP, I think Mr. Williams said something about it, which is going to go in more detail. And we also have like a presentation by Michelle Dillard talking about bringing the conversations back to teaching and learning. And then on May 13th, we have a lot of the chiefs. We have Dr. Coleman, the Chief Academic Officer. We have Dina Dawson, the Chief Accountability Research and Systems. We're also going to have Jimmy Adams, who is the Chief of Human Chief Human Resources. Cordelia Harden, the Chief of Finance. Chris Perkins, the Chief of Operations. So I guess within, we have 2 chiefs on here, Dr. Marshall and Mr. Moore. So we, in 3 sessions, we're going to have probably about 6 or 7 chiefs that we're going to bring to the NAACP program. Also, we are still, I'm working with Ms. Patrick about trying to line up speakers for next year. So if you want to hear speakers that's in the JCPS, can you please get with the educational chairperson Michelle, Patrick, so, because we're starting to already plan for next year. Thank everyone for coming.
Thank you. The Louisville branch NAACP proudly offers scholarships from 5 funds, 4 undergraduate scholarships, and 1 from students working on terminal degrees. The graduate scholarship is the Kaufman and Kaufman Scholarship, left to the NAACP by a former school counselor. And it is a trust-funded scholarship, and it is designated for students pursuing terminal degrees. These terminal degrees are in medicine, dentistry and pharmacy included, law and religion. The scholarships are also need-based and may go as high as $12,000 per year. The undergraduate scholarships, the Levy, Alexander, and Salome C. Worthington scholarships, come from a trust fund as well. The Levy scholarship is given approximately $10,000 per year. And again, it's awarded to needy and qualified students. There is the Mcdonald Scholarship. It is a corporate funded scholarship that has been in collaboration with the NAACP since 2007. And they have donated approximately 145,000 scholarships to needy and qualified students. And then there's the Marshall Family Scholarship, funded through public donations. It originated in 2016 and has awarded $35,000 in scholarships. This is a fund we ask you to support through donations. No amount is too small. All donated funds go to the scholarship. None of the funds are used for operational costs. Students and parents, if you're listening, you can obtain an application. Please go to the NAACP website, which is lounaacp.org. It's the first thing on the page. If you would like to donate to the scholarship fund, please send your donation to the Louisville Branch NAACP Education Committee, 4306 Wyola Court, Louisville, Kentucky, 40218, and state on your check it's for the Marshall Scholarship Fund. More than ever, our students need your support. This concludes our forum tonight. I look forward to see you at our next forum, I believe on April 8th. Be safe and good night.